Hey, Canes fans. Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Rod The Bodcast. My name is Jordan Betts, and I'll be your host. As always, I'm joined with my co-host, Mike May. Mike's going to give you a little brief overview of what we hope to accomplish here with the podcast.
Our goal of the podcast is to provide the Canes community with our unique spin on all the elements surrounding the organization. We felt embarking on this podcast was important to provide a holistic view of Canes fandom. A critical component to this podcast will be your engagement as we traverse the complexities of the Carolina Hurricanes franchise in pursuit of their second Stanley Cup.
As Mike alluded to, your engagement's vital to the podcast. In that purview, we think it's important that you get to know Mike and I as people, and that's why we want to give you a little background on ourselves. And Mike, tell the listeners a little about your background.
Well, I've been in Raleigh since '96. I grew up with two brothers and a sister. We were all huge Canes fans. Our family grew up loving hockey. We've been going to games ever since Carolina came to Raleigh. All my friends growing up, huge hockey fans. So it's kind of been a staple in my life since I was very little, and it's always been Canes fandom. You know what I mean? And we're lifelong Canes fans. We love watching in the good years, the bad years. I mean, we just have a great community, whether it's the players, the coaches, everything we have going on, the fans. It's just an awesome place. So that's kind of where I come from. I mean, I was surprised I didn't play for the Canes. I was a mean street hockey player, and I kind of didn't envision myself doing a podcast. I was more expecting to be playing for the Canes by now, but, you know, not all dreams come true. But
Sorry you're not our first player interview, but, kind of... in juxtaposing Mike, I didn't come from a hockey family. I grew up down at the beach in Wilmington, playing every sport besides hockey. I was fortunate enough to obtain a baseball scholarship and go to Duke University and played 4 great years of baseball there before I was drafted by the Boston Red Sox and spent 5 years in their organization. I've been blessed by sports and even had the opportunity to call baseball games on ESPN Network, ACC Network, Blue Devil Network, and to really just grow in the platform and kind of get a feel for being in front of the microphone. And this is just the next step in that. And my love for the Canes has been completely self-taught. Like I said, I didn't come from a hockey family, and, I didn't really understand the game. I remember the Canes winning in '06, and everyone was very excited about that, but that was kind of blip on the radar. And, back in the dark days, I was in Durham training, preparing for spring training, and just happened to meet Mike here at a wedding, and just started talking Canes, going to games, and although the team was bad, the tickets were cheap, so I had the opportunity to see a lot of games, and just got heavily invested and learned and used my sports knowledge in other areas to attribute it to my Canes knowledge and now NHL knowledge. And it's been really a fun process for me. And that's kind of why I think Mike and I are endeavoring into this podcast, because we think there's an opportunity for us to be, a pseudo voice of the fans and really grow into something that can be special and representative of all of us here in Raleigh. Now that we've provided you with a brief overview of who we are and why we appreciate the Canes, I think Mike and I want to jump into our first segment tonight. And if you could tell by the podcast episode 1 name, Piloting Expectations, I think the goal of episode 1 is to basically set the preface for our off-season discussion. And to do that, we really need to evaluate the 2021 season. Did the Canes meet expectations, Mike?
so when you really boil it down, this is a totally opinion-based question. If you're going to say, did they meet expectations and just take that off the exit in the playoffs, then I think that's a little short-sighted. I think if you ask us at the beginning of the season, how do you feel if the Canes win the Central Division, a division that has Tampa Bay,
no chance,
Stanley Cup champions, and Dallas Stars, the Stanley Cup semifinalists? Or
I can only speak for myself, but that I felt second place and we'd be thrilled with that, and hoping for a hard-fought first series with the defending runner-ups, Dallas Stars, who ultimately obviously don't make the playoffs. But expectations do evolve. And I think as fans, we kind of get caught up in the emotion. But if you can think back, I think most Canes fans, I know you and I are obviously included in this group, would have been thrilled to win the Central Division. And I think that shows growth. And,
Absolutely.
I know Sebastian Aho, and, obviously his voice carries a lot of weight here. He said it didn't feel like an advancement. Other pundits around the community and media said it didn't feel like an advancement. Well, for one, if you just look at the playoffs, it was. I mean, last year they lost to Boston in the first round. So this year they at least made it to the second round. But are we really saying this team in 2021 is not better than the 2019 team just because that team made it to the Eastern Conference Final?
So it's all perspective. And I mean, you look at a guy like Sebastian Aho. Sebastian Aho's goal in life and everything is win it all. And that's why he's Sebastian Aho. That's why he's done what he's done. That's why he's at where he's at in his career, is because he's a supreme competitor. So if Sebastian Aho came out and told me that he was excited that they made it to the second round, then I would be shocked. So we expect him to say that. That is what you expect out of a guy that is competitive as him. From a fan's perspective, if you look at it and you boil it down, you're looking at a Tampa Bay Lightning team that is just absolutely stacked. You're talking about probably the best goalie in the world. You're talking about one of the best goal scorers or playmakers in Kucherov when he's healthy. You have Braden Point, that's severely underpaid, elite center. I mean, you bring back Stamkos. You have a number one defenseman in Victor Hedman in his prime. I mean, whole
Norris winner. And
Sergachev is starting to become the guy that they traded Druin for. I mean, they've obviously won that deal. And you look at this amazing back end, you look at this fourth and third line, that's just amazing talent. The guys you want to have grinding and possessing pucks and tracking down pucks, that's a team that's going to be hard to beat no matter what. And I know the series ended 4-1, but you look at it from 5-on-5 and you feel really good about how the Canes played. I mean, there were blips where you're like, I'm not liking how we're playing 5-on-5, but we competed 5-on-5. The biggest thing that really hurt us, and you can say this through the whole playoffs, was just the lack of discipline. And you can blame some of it on the referees if you want to. There were some bad calls. There's always bad calls. Refs are humans. So you can blame it on the referees a little bit if you want, but the reality is they put themselves in a position to be in the penalty box. And when you're doing that against a Tampa Bay Lightning team that was at the time 40% in the playoffs on the power play, you're not going to like the end result.
No, I totally agree. And I do want to do a deeper dive into not only the Tampa series, but the Nashville series coming up. But, as far as Sebastian Aho, likely the future captain of the team after Jordan Staal, that's exactly the mindset you want from your leaders. Obviously, he's worn an A few times when Slavin and Marduk were injured. But, this is a guy that carries a tremendous amount of weight in the room, and he should. He's your best player. But it's different. Having spent time in locker rooms, you spent time in locker rooms. When you have success, there's only one end goal. Players don't view season and how you're, as a team, how the season ended based on, it's all about winning the last game. If you don't win the last game, man, it's a failure. I mean, especially when you have a team that did win a division, that has made deep runs in the playoffs. It's the same core of guys. They expect to make the jump. That's why it's imperative as fans not to take that as the word of God. We need to be objective and understand that, to your point, Tampa's roster, and we don't want to play the whole 18 million over the cap game, but on paper, that's the best roster in hockey, and it's anchored by the best goaltender in the world. And to look at the Canes roster, which is immensely talented and young and up and coming and all those things, I've told you this for a long time. I didn't think the window opened this year. I thought we were still 1 year away, and to me, the big question in a year was, is Mrazek the guy? And where I'm excited moving forward is, I don't think it's Peter, but I think for the first time, maybe since young Cam Ward, the franchise feels like, hey, we have a number one goalie, and it's a young kid who's a Calder finalist in Alex Nedeljkovic.
Yeah. And I mean, tracking him since we drafted him, as a goaltender for the U.S. team, like he was stupendous when he was young. He was a guy that you looked at and you're like, great athleticism, great hockey IQ. He makes those reactionary saves. I mean, his obvious knock is his size, but if you put that dude in a 6'2" frame and a little bit broader shoulders, you're talking about an elite goaltender. He has all the other tools. Now, with that being said, that doesn't matter.
Sure, he's 25. He's probably maxed out physically.
Don't think we're getting any more growth out of him. We can pray that maybe he stretches a little bit, but we all know that's not happening. So at the end of the day, you look at it and you've got a guy that's shown that he has composure. I mean, look at some of he had some bad goals he let in.
Yeah, I think the goal that's gonna game 1 Tampa,
of course,
the game ender basically, in a game that the Canes were largely the better team. That's gonna be the glaring, like, look at this moment. And I guess he also got, although it was labeled as a mental respite, he did get benched for Peter when they were down 2-0. I don't think that was necessarily indicative of Ned's performance.
Yeah.
This is a kid that in his first NHL playoff experience had a .920 save percentage. I mean, Canes didn't lose this series because of Ned or goaltending.
Well, yeah.
Game 4 was a little loose from Peter. You can't give up 6, especially when Vasi only gives up 4. That you got to win that game. But ultimately, the big question mark nationally and in the Canadian media, American media, has always been Canes goaltending. Well, going into next year, I don't feel like that's the case.
No, I mean, the thing that really gets me excited is the composure of when he made mistakes. Like, you saw the head sink for a second, but it was right back. He locked back in. I felt like he locked back in. I think as a goaltender, it's a mental game. It's a mind game. You can't get on top of yourself. Like, you gotta always be confident in your abilities, regardless of the mistakes you make. I think that's a huge credit to him. I mean, he's obviously grown in that fashion over time, and you like to see that in a goalie. You like to see that. You like to see his awareness, his puck playing. We all talk about it. It's obviously puts your team in a whole different position when he can drop behind the net, retrieve the puck, and your 2 defensemen have the comfort to go straight to the boards, and we're playing out of the zone through the goalie. Like, that's a much more difficult forecheck for the opposing team because you're playing with an extra skater at that point.
Puck, the way he handles the puck is a total game changer. I know we saw some potentially loose plays, but the defensemen talk about wanting him to do that, and I love it. But outside the puck playing, it's really, for a 25-year-old that had never been in that situation before, the composure, man. Like, he's there. And I'm not saying, hey, sell the farm on his contract here this offseason and give him whatever he wants. I'm not saying he deserves to be the next Jordan Binnington or hell, he's going to be the Cam Ward for the Canes, but he gives me, promise going forward. And I think we have bigger issues to discuss in the playoffs besides the goaltending.
Yeah, and I think we'll discuss more at a later date, but my jump conclusion is that we're looking at maybe a 2-year prove it deal.
2x3 maybe?
Yeah, I'm thinking 2x3 is my gut feeling on that. I might be totally wrong. They might go for a longer deal. I mean, but I really see it as a bridge deal where he proves himself.
It just makes too much sense for both sides. And as you said, we'll get into that. I don't know if it'll be our next podcast. We'll have these podcasts periodically throughout the offseason, kind of keeping you guys updated and in the know. Now let's kind of pivot. Let's macro discuss the Nashville series. Then we'll get into the Tampa series and kind of build us to the point that we're ready to talk about the offseason. What do you think about the Pred series?
So that was one where, I mean, you look at the discipline right there. You can talk about refs and that.
What did you think coming in? Like, what was your expectation?
Expectation was to win the series. I would have thought that we would have won it faster. To be totally honest with you, I was thinking Canes should have this in 5.
I was Canes in 5 as well.
Yeah. So you look at it and you understand their team is hot at the end of the season, but that team just did not thrill me.
Yeah, they had struggled versus Carolina.
Yeah.
Really didn't, if you disregard that last game, but really didn't beat them in a game all season until the penultimate game, so the next to last game, where Carolina tried to win, essentially.
Yeah.
And Carolina was fairly dominant in all those games. I didn't think it would be such a test, and I think unfortunately, having to go 6, one, it showed the immense value of Jacob Slavin. Not that us here in Raleigh needed any sort of verification on
Absolutely.
that. I'm a Dougie Hamilton fan, but I think it exposed Dougie. But more than anything, going into the Tampa series, it gave Tampa a blueprint
Absolutely.
for how to, render the Canes virtually ineffective.
Yep.
The physicality, clog in the middle, making sure the goalie has good sight lines. And we just, Carolina just seemed unable to crack the code. And, UC Saros is a great goalie, but he's not Andrei Vasilevsky.
No. And they showed that. And I think, like you said, it exposed the weakness of the Hurricanes in that if you pack it in, take away the middle of the ice, force the team to play from the periphery, make it hard in the neutral zone that this team struggles to create. If you play a responsible defensive game and you wait for your chances and you execute your chances, you can beat the Hurricanes. That was the kind of the story I saw that unfolded in Tampa, and like you said, that was kind of the mold that Hines had put together in Nashville, and it worked. And it honestly, I didn't love the fact that I was stressed out watching overtime games all the time.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, with the overtime, it could have been a sweep. It just played out.
Yeah.
It went 6 and it played out. It felt a lot closer than we anticipated. And that's not necessarily, the worst thing in the world. Playoff hockey series are always going to be tough, and they're, war of attrition, and you were down your best defenseman. And so I don't think you read too much into that. But back to the topic of expectation, I think that in that semblance, they underwhelmed compared to expectation. Going into the Tampa series, I don't know about you. I thought it was going to be Tampa in 6, but I felt if Carolina got a home game in 7, they would somehow make it happen. Obviously, did not occur. I don't think the series was as lopsided as a 4-1 5-game win for Tampa. But it's just that underwhelmed my expectation. And the truth is, although we may have felt, or at least I did, a year away coming into this, the team needs to be harder to play against. And these are off-season questions. But what did you see in the Tampa series that either one gives you hope that the guys internally are going to be able to fix this, or that, hey, back to the drawing board, we really got to, Don Waddell and company really need to kind of revisit a lot of things here.
So the number one point that I'll start with, that's a little bit of a bridge to your question, is the core players, the guys that are what this team is built around, your Sebastian Ahos, your Jacob Slavins, your Brett Pesci's, your Teravainens, your Svechnikovs, these guys that you hope are around for a long time. The heartbreak of the last 3 years, you hope is growing pains for the future. You look at, you've played Boston, and now Tampa.
Debatably the best team in the league all 3 years.
Each year.
Yeah. Let's remember, this is a hyperbole time of year. Everybody's speaking, being drastic. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to lose to any of those 3 teams, but it's more so how they lost.
The key is when do we get over the hump and become that team? And that's what I think is coming up. And I do think there will be changes to the roster. I don't think all of them are going to be because of management's choice. We'll get more into some of those things later down the road, but you look at the Dougie Hamilton contract, and I would, at this point today, I think, what are we, June 14th? I'm concerned. I would think I'm leaning more towards him leaving.
And based on Elliot Friedman's report, it sounds like that may be the case. This morning, he was granted permission from the organization to at least go out and explore trades. I would say it's probably 80% he's gone. But maybe he goes out to market and doesn't have the interest that he's anticipating. He's a 6'6" right-handed defenseman that scores, so he will.
Yeah.
But maybe he'll find out that he's not going to get the Peter Angelo deal. He'll be closer to Krug. And if he's closer to Krug, I could see him back here in Raleigh.
Absolutely. I think if that's the money, with that being said, term is huge as well. So if if he wants 7-8 years, which makes sense at his age, at the stage in his career, he wants to settle down, be somewhere, lock in his contract, because he's made good money early in his career. Now this is the last contract. Yep. This is what he would probably want to be the big final contract that he plays out his career, maybe plays as a veteran for 1 or 2 seasons after that.
This is the money deal, though.
As a guy who's turning 28 in a couple of days, you look at a 7-8 year deal, you're talking 35, 36 years old.
It's probably not going to age well, and maybe we don't want to get all our Dougie takes. I know he's the hot button topic right now, but maybe that contract doesn't age well. The last thing I'll say on it, because like I said, I don't want to detract from our Tampa discussion too much, but you got to pay for offense in this league, and I'm concerned how the team plays, strategically without an offensive threat in the back end, because I think Jake Bean, best case at least, is a few years away from being that dynamic guy in the NHL.
Absolutely. And yeah, like you said, this will be something that we will touch
a lot.
Yeah, this is a topic that we both have very strong opinions about, and we have a lot of opinions about them. So we'll get into this topic at a later episode and really dive in and give you our in-depth analysis on it.
Pivoting back towards, not to ignore the Nashville series, but the Tampa one's the one that matters. I think we feel like at the end of the day, although Nashville was a tougher series than we anticipated, talent won out. They were just the more skilled team, and to beat them in 6 games, fine, no big deal. You roll into the second round, what I guess would be called the Central Finals, to use the 2021 terms, versus not just the Tampa Bay Lightning that finished 3rd in the Central Division, but the Tampa Bay Lightning fully loaded. And I don't have a problem with the cap situation. The rules are the rules. They didn't break any of them. It's been impressive as can be that Nikita Kucherov sat out the whole year and was able to come back and be
hip surgery.
That's not easy,
not
man.
Easy.
It's not. Hips are debilitating for athletes. But so for him to come back and be ready to go and clicking all cylinders, and let's just kind of go, not necessarily game by game, but just giving me a general feel for how you felt about the series. I think it's a little superficial to say that, not to critique Rod in any way, but it's a little superficial to say that Vasi won it, because as great as he was, I still thought they got outplayed, and maybe not necessarily as much in 5-on-5, but the specialty teams were, drastically weighted the other way.
I do think if you have a different goalie in net, you maybe see a couple more pucks going. And I think that might change the whole tone of the series if in game 1 or game 2, some of those go in when he seemed like he wasn't really playing human. So it's really hard, because you have to think, when do the goals go in? Because that matters. If they're in the very last game and it's down to the wire, it doesn't matter. Like you saw,
yeah, it's that game 2 goal for Svetch that didn't move. You were down 2 with 90 seconds.
Not moving the needle.
Yeah.
So you look at it, and obviously he's a big part of it, but simultaneously, like, you have to understand that even though we looked competitive at 5-on-5 most of the time, like, that team was better.
They're better.
That team was better, and at every line, their first line was better than our first line. Their fourth line was better than our fourth line. I mean, there's no way around it. That doesn't mean
the Canes didn't play well, control the game for large swaths. I mean, and you can make the game 1, Carolina was definitely the better team.
Yeah.
Game 2, I thought Tampa was the better team basically throughout.
Yeah. Game
3, the game the Canes won, Tampa dominated that game. Yeah. That was maybe the Canes' worst game until game 5.
That's the nature of hockey.
And then, game 4 with all the oddities of that second period and weird goals. You just, when you're playing a guy as good as Vasi, you just can't lose a game when he gives up 4, and he gives up a soft one to Slavin. And game 5, the crowd was great. It felt like PNC, how we expected to be in the playoffs, but as soon as Tampa got the first one, that it just died, and the belief seemed to just sink out of the building. And
reality was
it's at some point the mentality, as much as these guys won it, I'm not sure if it's a mentality. I think we talked leaving the arena that night. Is it playoff hockey's different? we're such an analytically driven organization. I think you can compare the Canes in a way to the the old Athletics, the Billy Bean. Well, I guess Billy Bean's still there, but the Billy Bean Athletics, and the fact that we're going to do things a little different. But when the margins shrink, when it's a 7-game series as opposed to 56 this year, but 82 games, the margins are so much more slight. And I'm a pro analytics guy, but are we really, positioning ourselves from a, cultural standpoint, which I think Rod does a great job. I'm just kind of more, throwing things against the wall. Is it culture? Is it physicality? Is it a lack of skill between the Carolinas of the world and the Colorado, Vegas, Tampa, who are the only teams that I think are on paper better than Carolina at this point?
Yeah. So as you are, I think there is a huge place for analytics in sports in general. I think it's amazing. And I think what Tulski does with our team is phenomenal.
That's one guy they got to keep, no doubt.
We got to break out the checkbook, but we'll get into checkbooks at a later date for many reasons. But you look at it, and it's growing just like any other profession. Hockey analytics aren't 50 years old, and we have to realize, how do we measure playoffs versus regular season? And I know they have the tools to do that. I know they do that. It's fine-tuning those things to find players that are successful in both situations.
Well, eye test and analytics, right? Not to go back to our old pal Dougie Hamilton, but analytics say he's one of the best 3 to 5 defensemen in the entire league.
And sometimes
I love him, but
hit yourself on the head.
But you watched him in the Nashville series, and it was a little bit of a liability. Now, I think impending free agent spotlight has always seemed to follow that guy. I think his mistakes are often, exceptionally divisive, in the hockey Twitter, even Canes Twitter. And so I think we maybe exaggerate those things, but there is a disparity between the analytics and the eye test on him. I mean, heck, you look at analytics, and, some models struggle to, goaltending analytics are really tough. Like Andre Vasilevsky is not an analytical dream, but when you watch him play, he's the consensus best guy in the world. Yeah.
And when I think about it, when I really dive in and try to think about Dougie analytically, it's obviously the numbers are going to be there. Dude is a possession wizard. I mean, puck movement's fantastic. His power play is fantastic. Offensive is fantastic. He plays with Jacob Slavin. It doesn't matter what your analytical measure is. That's going to skew it.
When he plays with Jacob, he is at least an average defenseman, no doubt. I think that's probably what he always is. But when you play with Jacob Slavin, he becomes an above-average defenseman.
Yeah.
When you take that away, he's a top-pairing guy who is more offensively oriented. Yeah. You touched on Dougie in the power play, and I think for me, even more than the kill, the power play was just a glaring weakness in the series. And I know we've talked a lot about it, but just tell me what your thoughts are on the Canes power play in the Tampa series and kind of what you were seeing from a strategic perspective.
Yeah, so this is the Rod the Bodcast. So in Rod we trust. So, but you and I, we sit here and we're talking about it, and you're looking at these units, and you have the number 2 unit in the league for the regular season. You have talent, pucks flying around. It looks beautiful. The system's working really well. You get some injuries, you see some changes, and all of a sudden, it looks different. And taking Svetch off, I know this is a big point for you. Taking Svetch off power play 1, and then not having success, and leaving him off power play 1. That was when I started to get all right, you've got to throw your boy back on there, because he's a game changer, whether it's his puck retrieval or his setups. He does it all ultimately on the power play, and he's a workhorse. So
yeah, they scored in the Nashville series. I honestly forget what game it was. Natchez scored glove side high on Saros on kind of like a mixed. They were changing between group 1 and 2. Natchez had not traditionally been on the first unit. And scores a goal, and then Rod kind of just came back to that group for the rest of the postseason, removing Svetch off the first unit. And, while I understood him carrying that into the next game and then into the Tampa series, when it became apparent that group had no rhythm with each other, and that's not to say Marty Necas is not a first line power play quality guy, because he's one of the more talented players, not only in the team, but creativity wise, speed wise, the way he can bring the puck in and the way he sees the game. He's one of the real burgeoning players in the league. This guy is incredible. We're very fortunate to have him, but it was apparent him and Dougie had no rhythm.
No chemistry.
How many drop back passes just went straight into the neutral zone? They weren't in the same situation. You touched on it. Svetch puck retrieval. I mean, even when in a down year, the guy is easily the best on the team at going into the corner and getting the puck and retrieving it off the faceoff. And possession for this team on their power play has just been vital. Zone entries are not great, but if they keep the zone, they do. And that speaks to it. They're the second best power play unit in the whole league during the regular season. This will be a reoccurring theme, even though he had a down year, as I alluded to. In the playoffs, well, he was your highest scoring forward in the Tampa series. 5 points in 5 games. You got to let the young bull play, man. If this team is going to win a cup with this core group of guys, he's going to have to be your superstar. Sebastian Aho, great player, but Andrei Svechnikov needs to become one of the best 10 players in the world, and he has the ceiling to do that. Everyone around the league will tell you he has the ceiling to do that. You just got to trust him in those situations, and he needs to get rid of the weak infractions, stick infractions, reckless play. I don't think you want to take that edge. Rod has talked about that a ton, but when your season's on the line, you got to have your best players out there, and we can talk about Rod's insistence on playing guys on their offside, on the half wall, and how much more time that takes to get off one-timers and things of that nature. I'm hopeful, just like we saw in 2019 when he kept Justin Falk on there for the entire year, first unit for the entire year and to the playoffs, that we'll use this offseason and kind of make that adjustment going into next year. Because we saw how that unit took off in 2020 and how good it was this year. And, as you said, and Rod, we trust. So we're confident, assuming Tom Dundon does the right thing.
Knock on wood.
That Rod is savvy enough and, obviously a great hockey mind to put his guys in a position to succeed. Moving from the power play to, the penalty kill, which was obviously a major, point of emphasis in the Tampa series. Mike, how did Carolina go from maybe having the best penalty kill in the world versus Nashville to seems like giving up a goal every other opportunity versus the Tampa Bay Lightning?
Well, if you look at Tampa Bay's power play and some of the guys they have on there, it's an incredible power play. And you think about the fact that if you look back at a lot of their power play goals, they would be clear that just barely didn't get out of the zone. And as soon as you're out of position, that power play is going to put the knife to your throat.
It really felt like
it's surgical.
Oh, it really felt like you could see it at the blue line when Hedman would keep it in and we would be overextended. Then it was just tic-tac-toe and see you later. And it didn't matter. When you have Victor Hedman, Nikita Kucherov, Braden Point, Steven Stamkos, and Alex Killorn, I mean, the last guy might not make sense, but he's a bull in the middle and behind the net and doing a great job of, being the physical presence so the other guys can, let their elite talents, shine through. I think the moral of the story is just don't go on the kill versus the Lightning.
Absolutely. And, you look back at it and it's something that we would have loved to not have to deal with, but it happened. It was the hand we were dealt and they capitalized. And it's unfortunate, but like I said, I think it's growing pains. I think some of the penalties we took in that series were very silly. I just think some of them were not smart. Offensive zone penalties at any point are not ones you like to see, and especially in such a heightened environment where every power play penalty kill matters. I mean, the team went from having a power kill to looking like it had one of the worst in the playoffs. So that's a credit to Tampa Bay. And it's one of those things, like, guys are going to learn from that. You have to be more responsible. We're talking about this right now, but you look at a team like the Islanders, and when they play their hockey and when they don't take penalties, they're not by any means one of the better teams in hockey, in my opinion, from a talent standpoint. But they're coached extremely well. They play within their system, and when they're not taking penalties, they look great because they're hard to beat. So I think the Canes have something to learn from that. Personally, I think we need to stay out of the box if we want to have a chance to win the cup. You have to have every area of your game iron tight at that point. So
no, I totally agree with you. And hey, Canes fans, and you're never going to hear the apologists, the refs are cheating us from us. I mean, that's just never going to be our perspective. Would we have liked to see the numbers a little bit closer as far as opportunities? But I'll look you right in the face, Mike, and say I had little to no faith that we were doing anything on the power play anyway. So it was more so keeping Tampa, staying out of the box and keeping Tampa off the power play. And, that was the difference in the series. And combine that with Andre Vasilevsky, taking some opportunities to stand on his head and really, steal the momentum. That kind of wrote the book on the Canes season. And to kind of surmise my thoughts on the playoffs and the regular season is to use the quote from the great Dennis Green. They are who they thought we were. This team is exactly who I thought they were going to be. Talented, up and coming. They overachieved based on my initial expectations in 2021 during the regular season. They disappointed slightly based on the hope that had grown. But if I'm being honest with myself, I thought Tampa was better. Like I said, I picked them in 6. Does this, diminish my expectations into next year? Absolutely not. If they are strategic this offseason, find a way to keep a Dougie Hamilton or replace him talent-wise, they should be right back in this position. And I'll be the first to say it. Andrei Svechnikov's not going to have another down year. Not like this year. Sebastian Aho keeps getting better. Hopefully Teuvo Teravainen doesn't miss literally almost the entire season. Are you going to get the same types of years from Jordan Staal, Nino Niederreiter, Vincent Trocheck? I hope so. Because the lack of that second line scoring was glaring in the Tampa series. But I'm extremely hopeful. Discovering what you had in Ned, the young core. These guys have 3, years of tangible playoff experience. They don't know what it's like not to go to the playoffs. And so I'm very confident, and I'm sure you feel the same.
Absolutely. I mean, we know that the organization is heading in the right direction. You look at the Dougie Hamilton deal, and that's definitely a massive stress point for a lot of Canes fans. The reality of it is it's really out of anyone's hands but Dougie's. It's what Dougie wants, and if ultimately it doesn't work out in our structure, I mean, you have to think about it. If the term and the dollar is too high and you can't afford him, then you can't afford him. That is what it is. We're not blessed with a Nathan McKinnon contract. We don't have a superstar player getting paid second line money. We don't have that wiggle room necessarily because you got to get Aho, he's paid. You got to get Svech paid, whether that's a bridge deal or a long-term deal coming up.
No. And they were fortunate to get Pesce, Slavin, and Teravainen at the numbers they got them.
Yeah.
But we're not paying the second best player in the world, pennies for what he's worth.
Oh, absolutely not. And you look at the Slavin and the Pesce contracts, and when I think about them in terms of what does that mean towards our cap hit, you also look at the Brady Shays and the Gardeners, and so the back end is heavily priced already, and with one guy that's not even playing. Opinions on Shea, he looked a lot better in the playoffs.
He definitely raises value in the playoffs.
Absolutely. That's still a contract I look at, and I'm like, you would like to see more value out of that slot. We're spoiled. Like, you're looking at it, and you're looking at Jacob Slavin money for Brady Shea, and you're like, oh man, like this is tough. He's probably a little bit overpaid based on NHL standard. If you're asking my opinion, would I be happy for him to stay? I think at this point, you'd like to keep him. If you see him go, I also think that's not the end of the world. I think he can be replaced if necessary.
I'm actually kind of glad you led us down this rabbit hole, because I think it sets us up nicely to kind of give a little teaser for what we're going to do next week. And our goal as we get into the off season, now that we've discussed the regular season and playoffs. We are in full off-season mode here at the podcast, and it's going to be an eventful one, maybe the most important off-season in the history of the franchise. Next week, I think we're going to, most importantly, this is the podcast. We need to talk about that Rod Brindamore contract, and is he going to be able to get his staff taken care of, or is Tom Dundon going to do the right thing? Additionally, as things go on, we're going to, of course, talk about the, Andrei Svechnikov's RFA status. What's that deal going to look like? Is it going to be a bridge? It's going to go long term. They're going to extend him to 8. We'll see. It's going to be a hard number to define money-wise based on his year this year. Unsurprisingly to you guys that have stuck with us for this long, we're going to talk a lot of Dougie Hamilton. Is it going to be a sign and trade? Are they going to get a deal done? I think Dougie would love to stay. I think the organization would like to have him. But what's that price point going to be? And right now, it's just not looking great. Lastly, we're going to give in-depth details. We'll go through the lineup, look at the RFAs, the UFAs, and, give a holistic breakdown of who we think stays, what number they probably need to be at from a cap standpoint to really give this team an opportunity to position itself to where it needs to be to, remain a cup contender. How's that sound, Mike?
That sounds great. And just a quick PSA from the boys at the podcast. If we're losing and at home and maybe it's a playoff game,
especially an elimination playoff game,
let's try not to do the wave. The wave is fine when we're smacking the Islanders in the second round.
That was a whole vibe.
That was a vibe. That felt real good. What doesn't feel real good is when you're losing in the playoffs and you do the wave. That might be my opinion. I might be totally wrong.
We're not here to be fun sponges, but etiquette.
That one we might have missed. We might have missed the target.
Mike, tell people where to find us on social.
You can follow us on Twitter at The Bodcast, on Instagram at The Rod The Bodcast. You can also follow the podcast on Podbean, The Rod The Bodcast. It'll be on YouTube as well as The Rod The Bodcast. Coming soon, we'll have the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well.
Mike, thanks for letting them know that. And thanks to you for choosing to spend a few minutes out of your day to get a little Canes content and listen to Mike and I. And we're really appreciative and humbled by you doing that. And we're excited to take this journey with you. And I can already envision Rod lifting another cup here in the next couple of years. And I'm excited to talk about it.